time, Renz mentioned that according to Lao Tzu, the world cannot be improved. It is the opposite for our generation, right? Since we want changes and improvements. Now, let's see Lao Tzu's perspective that brought him to this idea. Renz?
The line in verse 29 that stuck in my head is stated as, "The master sees things as they are, without trying to control them. She lets them go their own way and resides at the center of the circle." So basically, Lao Tzu wants us to understand that the world cannot be improved because the world is already the master of change. And those worldly changes are uncontrollable. I will try to explain this through an analogy. I can associate the description of a true master to a certain plant. A plant has its own roots that hold it in place and withstand the forces of wind, mud flow, or water stream. Even if a storm strikes or a drought arrives, the plant will stay at its place, unable to escape from the disasters. The master should be like a plant that even if the world throws countless life challenges at him, he must stay at the center of the circle. He should not force himself to go out of the circle just to avoid the challenges. He should face it like a plant, staying at its roots, because even if he goes to another place where he thinks is safe, there is still a chance that it will be struck by a disaster without him knowing. As Lao Tzu said, there is a time for being ahead, a time for being behind, a time for being safe, and a time for being in danger. So even if we try to make things the way we want it to be, there will always be a factor that will lead us to disappointment and regrets. Because the changes we make are only decent in our minds if it is consistent. This is also applicable to what authoritarian dictators have endured. Despite their attempts to abuse their authority and force things to go their way, they were overthrown by a united people fighting for their freedoms. The world cannot be improved indeed, because it is the one which has the power to decide whom it will lead to safety or whom it will put in vulnerability. However, if we stay at the center of the circle like a plant, even though we suffer from various disasters, we could still experience the feeling of being under the warm sunlight and cultivate with fruit in our hands.
Grab what life throws you. That must be the motto of a ruler since he believes that the world cannot be improved. For him, we have no control over the future and only fate will decide what the world will turn out to be. I've always heard that saying from adults in our family. Grown-ups tend to advise the younger generation to enjoy life and be in harmony with destiny. Well, I respect their ideology since we do not have the same experiences in life. And just like Lao Tzu said, we have no control over anyone's choices and preferences. However, based on my own observation, I think in today's generation, most, that includes me, are courageous enough to stand on their post and abandon the old saying. They were a non-creeping plant that stays at the circle. However, this generation adapted. We are now a creeping and climbing plant that strives to avoid challenges without leaving our roots. Yes, Lao Tzu is right when he said that there is a time for being ahead, a time for being behind, a time for being safe, a time for being in danger, and there will always be a factor for disappointments and regrets. But I think this generation is the right time to turn possible disappointments into improvements. It was a total opposite of Lao Tzu's ideology, but at least we can now see the difference between our time and Lao Tzu's, as well as the difference in ideologies. He lived in the time when civilization and government was just starting to be critical, while we are already living in it for years now. However, both are just in accordance with the reality we live in. We have our own experiences that no one has the right to invalidate. Moving forward, we know that Lao Tzu is a materialist philosopher. Can we find statements in the selection that support his materialistic view?
Thank you for having me here, Miss Bautista. After reading the book, I think he expressed a materialist interpretation of experience in verse 29. But let me first explain what sets a materialist viewpoint apart from a spiritualist. A materialist says, all that you see, that is all that reality is. This is all. There is nothing else to life, implying that only tangible things are the only matter in life. On the other hand, spiritualist argues, this is not all. The visible is not all. The tangible is not all. Returning to the primary question, Lao Tzu wrote in verse 29 that master sees things as they are without trying to control them. This implies that he perceives things as is and has no means to change them. This reconciles with Lao Tzu's inaction and appreciation of differences.
Being open and tolerant is a crucial aspect of Taoism. And it is true that we must be open and tolerant of individual differences, since the natural world is so complex and human beings are so diverse. No one is purely identical, thus the need to recognize the differences. Everyone is unique and no one should force anybody to change.
That is where Lao Tzu's inactions come in. When we encounter someone different from us, we must apply an action. Do not act or talk if it is unnecessary because one word or one move can damage someone's life. We never know if that someone is experiencing circumstances and our one word or one move might trigger them.
That made me remember the 10-second rule. If we see something on someone that cannot be fixed within 10 seconds, it's better to let it be. Inaction is a practice of not doing what is unnecessary, and point in fact, it is applicable in some situations. However, what are the limits and benefits of Lao Tzu saying, practice not doing and everything will fall into place? Let's hear from Miss Sherlette.
Practice not doing and everything will fall into place is an unclear message. Basically, it is his for politicians. He suggests that politicians adopt a practice of judicious inaction wherein they should not do nothing but intercede only when necessary. Practice not doing is applicable only during unnecessary times. The master should do nothing or not act if not sure how, if it is not about people's welfare. However, if the welfare of people is at stake, a leader should interfere not more than necessary, since according to the teaching, too much intervention would cause catastrophe. On the other hand, practicing not doing benefits the balance of the natural world. Without doing anything, the master is content the nature can proceed to its processes with the intervention of human actions.
Does this mean that it is applicable during war? And does Lao Tzu prefer and agree on it?
He prefers inaction, but as previously said, inaction does not mean literally doing nothing. It is doing what is appropriate and doing what is just necessary.
To add, Lao Tzu is in favor of military action to a specific extent only.
You heard that, guys? Lao Tzu, an advocate of inaction, harmony and peace, is in favor of military action. But according to Amira, to a specific extent only. How gentle or brutal do you think is Lao Tzu's commendation towards this kind of action? Be prepared as we are to apprehend this issue on the return of Archaeos Historias.